For the past few weeks, North Korea has been making headlines here in South Korea with a series of provocations. These included missile launches, approaches close to the border by warplanes, and artillery shots. So what is going on and why is there tensions? The tensions have become more heightened recently here on the Korean Peninsula. For more, we have Professor Mason Richey, Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, North Korea's provocations come at a time when the world is on edge amid other conflicts such as war in Ukraine and recent developments in the Taiwan strait. Do these situations come into play with respect to the recent moves by the North?
Yeah, so we have this sort of ironic expression in English where someone does something at a bad time, and we say read the room, try to understand that your actions are inconvenient for others. And unfortunately, I think Kim has perhaps understood that a little bit too well and applied the opposite lesson. And he's reading the room, and he's understanding that in fact, in part, the West is distracted by what is happening in Ukraine in terms of how capable it is of marshaling the political will and the resources to be able to put pressure on North Korea for its missile launches, for its violations of UN Security Council resolutions. So I think that distraction has played a role. Obviously, another important component is that the split between Russia and the United States, and to a little bit of a lesser degree, acutely at least, Russia and China, means that the United Nations Security Council is essentially blocked as a pathway for the United States and its allies to put pressure on North Korea through resolutions condemning and putting further sanctions on North Korea for these missile launches in particular. As for the Taiwan issue, it's a little bit less sure, I think, what role that might play. Earlier when China was putting pressure on Taiwan following Nancy Pelosi's visit, that might have played a role. That's probably a little bit less the case now in terms of distraction. However, speaking of China, we do have the Party Congress going on right now in Beijing, and in some ways that might actually be restraining North Korea a little bit. So it will be interesting to see how Pyongyang reacts going forward after the Party Congress in Beijing finishes.
Right, and speaking about violations, Seoul called Pyongyang's firing of hundreds of artillery shots into maritime buffer zones off its coast last Friday a violation of the Inter-Korean Military Agreement of September 19, 2018. Whether to maintain this agreement came into question recently. Why is it important? Why is this agreement so important to the peace on the peninsula?
Yeah, so symbolically, it's important because it's really the last agreement that is at all still really in force from the diplomatic and peace offensive that we saw under the Moon Jae-in administration, where we saw eventually a summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-Un in Singapore, and another one in Hanoi, and the meeting at the Joint Security Area in the demilitarized zone. This military agreement is really the last standing agreement between the two Koreas during that time period. So symbolically, it's important, I think, to keep. More importantly, in some ways, keeping the military agreement in force and honoring it keeps tensions lower. And it therefore it reduces the space for misperception by the two Koreas or by the North Koreans and the South Korea-U.S. alliance. It therefore reduces the possibility of miscalculation, which could spiral out of control potentially. So I think it's important in that sense. Unfortunately, North Korea has been in violation of this agreement, as South Korea correctly points out, with these artillery launches into the buffer zones in the maritime buffer zones in the in the Yellow Sea. I think another question, speaking of agreements, is the 1991 Inter-Korean Agreement. We've seen some discussion of how the ruling party there is calling into question this 1991 denuclearization agreement and essentially thinking perhaps about asking to reintroduce tactical nuclear weapons on the southern side of the border. And there's South Korean chatter among the political class about perhaps trying to arm itself with nuclear weapons going forward. And this, of course, is in response to North Korea's systematic and long-term violation of this 1991 agreement as well. So we're definitely in a bad diplomatic dynamic right now.
Well, lastly, briefly, what is Kim Jong-un trying to achieve from this?
He has at least, I think, three objectives with this most recent flurry of tests and demonstrations. The first is making technical progress, especially perhaps on some of these new systems. We see what might be a new intermediate range ballistic missile that was fired over the Japanese archipelago. Secondly, he wants to test his crews and his systems and for the already functional, operational, and deployed missile systems. And thirdly, he's sending diplomatic messages that he wants the rest of the world to understand that he's not giving up his nuclear weapons, and in that sense, he wants to normalize North Korea's possession of its nuclear arsenal.
Well, Professor, I know we can sit and talk about this all day long, but thank you so much for your answers this morning, and I hope you have a great day.
Great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.